What we are doing here is a clinical examination of social anxiety, but we're not treating it as a feeling. We are treating it as what it is, a biosocial calculation for survival, an algorithm running on some seriously ancient hardware.
So let's start with a piece of data that contradicts the common narrative. This number, greater than 25%, represents a drop in a key physiological metric known as RMSSD. You can think of it as a direct measure of your nervous system's flexibility, its ability to stay calm and engaged. A drop this big isn't just a dip, it's a signal that the brain's entire social engagement system is shutting down.
And right there, that's the central mystery, isn't it? Why would a rational system intentionally sabotage its own performance? It just flies in the face of the logic of optimization. The system is executing its code perfectly, but the result is a catastrophic failure. Our job is to find out why.
So our analysis is going to be a forensic audit. We're going to deconstruct this algorithm layer by layer. We'll look at the mismatch protocol, then the submission algorithm itself. From there, we'll investigate the habituation failure and the extinction blockade, before finally putting it all together to understand the system's logic.
The audit has to begin with the operating environment, because it's here that we find a fundamental conflict between the system's ancient, hard-coded goals and the modern digital world it's being forced to run in.
You have to understand, this algorithm was calibrated for a finite game, a world of small, known groups, maybe 150 people tops, where social stakes were tangible and getting kicked out was a direct threat to survival. But today, it's operating in an infinite game. It's swimming in global, unbounded digital networks where status is an abstract metric and digital silence feels exactly like ostracism. It's being flooded with supernormal stimuli it was never designed to handle.
This concept from economics, the principal-agent problem, perfectly describes what's going on. Think of it this way. You, the conscious individual, are the principal. You're the boss. The ancient, autonomous algorithm running your social responses, that's the agent. And the problem is, your agent's priorities are no longer aligned with yours.
And this right here is the core thesis of our entire audit. It's a critical distinction to make. The system isn't broken, not at all. It is ruthlessly and successfully optimizing for its original goal, avoiding status loss at all costs. The problem is that this ancient priority is now in direct conflict with your modern goals, like performance, connection, and actually gaining status.
So now we audit the first mechanism. What the code reveals is a foundational bias toward hypersensitivity. And let's be clear, this is not a bug. It is a feature, dictated by some brutal evolutionary math.
The system is constrained by what's called error management theory. Think about the evolutionary math. The cost of a false negative, failing to detect a real social threat, was catastrophic. We're talking aggression, expulsion, maybe death. The cost of a false positive, perceiving a threat that isn't really there, just a little bit of stress. Given that asymmetry, the system was selected to be a hypersensitive smoke detector.
But the negative externality of this better safe than sorry logic is a measurable and very targeted degradation of performance. Look at the data. The system doesn't degrade your competence. Your speech content is still high quality. It specifically inhibits your delivery, your execution, because that's how it minimizes social risk.
Now, a skeptic would argue this is just a simple skill deficit. Okay, let's test that null hypothesis. If it were just a lack of skill, we'd see uniform degradation across the board. Both your content and your delivery would be poor. But the data falsifies that. What we see is a precise, surgical suppression of delivery alone. That points directly to an active internal regulator throttling your performance on purpose.
So, let's reset. The system solved the problem of potential social threat by degrading your performance. But in doing so, it created a new, bigger problem. Now that degraded performance is perceived by others as incompetence, which guarantees the very status loss the algorithm was trying to prevent in the first place. This sets the stage for the next layer of the system.
Our audit now moves to the system's learning mechanism, and what we find here is a critical failure in how it processes repeated social data. A failure that actually transforms neutral inputs into threat signals.
The rational constraint here is just pure speed. The system's low-road neural pathway has to react to potential threats way faster than you can consciously think. I mean, look at this timeline. The threat stimulus appears. A mere 74 milliseconds later, your amygdala, your brain's threat detector, is already firing. You don't even become consciously aware of what you're seeing until almost a quarter of a second has passed. The system will always prioritize a rapid defense over an accurate one.
And the unintended consequence of this speed-optimized system is a catastrophic failure to learn. Now, habituation is just a fancy term for getting used to something. A healthy brain sees a neutral face, realizes it's not a threat, and its response decays. But this system is different. It either fails to learn that the face is safe, or even worse, as you see with threat cues, its response actually increases with every exposure. It learns more fear, not safety.
This data completely falsifies the idea that the system is just a slower learner. It's not a linear delay. The data shows a non-linear tipping point. The critical divergence happens somewhere between the third and fifth exposure. If the system's physiological arousal stays too high for too long, the whole learning process flips. It goes from habituating, learning safety, to sensitizing, learning fear. The system literally starts amplifying the threat signal.
So, let's rehook. The system solved for speed, but in the process, it created a learning mechanism that actively validates its own initial errors. This flawed process just deepens the problem, amplifying the perceived threat and setting the stage for the final, inescapable locking mechanism.
All right, the final part of the audit. This reveals the masterstroke of this algorithm, a mechanism that makes the entire system immune to corrective data, locking it into a permanent, self-validating loop.
The system operates on a perfectly rational learning principle, one of the most basic laws there is: negative reinforcement. Any behavior that provides even temporary relief from a bad feeling, like anxiety, gets powerfully reinforced. The brain learns one very simple lesson: do that again. And here's the negative externality, the smoking gun of the entire system. Subtle safety behaviors, things like averting your gaze, checking your phone, mentally rehearsing what you're going to say, they hijack this reinforcement loop. And the key insight is this: when the catastrophe you're worried about doesn't happen, your brain doesn't learn that the situation was safe. It learns that your safety behavior worked.
This directly falsifies the common advice that any exposure is helpful, because these safety behaviors actively prevent what's known as a prediction error. That's the crucial mismatch signal the brain needs, the signal that says, hey, the awful thing I predicted didn't happen. Without that error signal, the brain cannot update its threat model. Learning is physically blocked.
So the algorithm solution for immediate, short-term relief is a mechanism that guarantees the long-term preservation and reinforcement of the initial fear. This final component completes the inescapable logic of the system. Okay, let's synthesize the findings of our audit. The complete architecture here is not a series of independent failures. It is a single, perfectly integrated, self-reinforcing feedback loop.
Let's trace the full loop. 1. The system's hypersensitivity trigger fires on a perceived threat. 2. This immediately activates performance inhibition, which degrades your social delivery. 3. The poor performance is then seen as proof of the initial threat, which gets amplified by the habituation failure. And 4. You use safety behaviors to cope, which blocks any new data that could correct the error, preserving the original fear. The output of each stage becomes the input for the next. It's a closed, inescapable logic loop, where the solution is the problem.
And this internal system has predictable external consequences. Markets adapt to incentives. So that's our short seller signal. If you have a population running an algorithm that ruthlessly punishes social risk, the logical market adaptation is technological. Expect social platforms to continue evolving away from high-risk open-ended interactions and toward low-risk structured engagement that caters directly to this risk-averse algorithm. This system isn't just in your head. It is actively reshaping the digital world to fit its own logic.